The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop outside the general store in Delta, Colorado, sending up a cloud of dust that mixed with the afternoon heat of August 1876. And when Augustus Noble stepped forward to help his mail-order bride down from the coach, he found her collapsed against the seat, her face pale as winter snow and her breathing shallow as a wounded bird. "Miss Willa Owens," Augustus called out, his weathered hands gripping the coach door. The woman barely stirred, her eyes fluttering but not quite opening. The stagecoach driver, an older man with tobacco-stained whiskers, shook his head gravely. "She took sick about 2 days back," the driver explained, climbing down from his perch. "Tried to get her to rest proper at the last station, but she insisted on pushing through. Said she had someone waiting for her in Delta." Augustus felt his chest tighten with concern. He had been corresponding with Willa for nearly 8 months, ever since his younger sister Clara had convinced him that a ranch the size of his needed a woman's touch. At 32 years old, Augustus had resigned himself to bachelorhood, too busy with cattle and horses to court anyone properly. But Willa's letters had been thoughtful and kind, full of observations about the world that made him smile during long, lonely evenings. "Help me get her down," Augustus said to the driver, reaching into the coach. Willa was slight, her frame delicate beneath the traveling clothes that looked worn from the journey. Her dark blonde hair had come loose from its pins, and perspiration dotted her forehead despite the fact that her skin felt cold to the touch. The driver helped Augustus lift her carefully from the coach, and several townspeople gathered around, their faces etched with concern and curiosity. Delta was a small town, barely 300 souls, and the arrival of Augustus Noble's mail-order bride had been the subject of much speculation for weeks. "She needs a doctor," said Martha Henderson, the general store owner's wife, pressing her hand to Willa's forehead. "She is burning up something fierce. This is more than just travel fatigue." "Doc Brennan is out at the Morrison place," her husband called from the store entrance. "Their youngest broke his arm this morning." Augustus made a quick decision. His ranch was only 3 miles outside town, and he had tended enough sick cattle and horses to know the basics of fever management. "I will take her to the ranch. Mrs. Henderson, could you gather some willow bark tea and whatever else might help? I will send my ranch hand back to collect it." Within minutes, Augustus had Willa settled in the back of his wagon on a bed of blankets that Martha had quickly assembled. Her trunk and belongings were loaded beside her, and Augustus climbed onto the driver's seat with his heart hammering against his ribs. This was not how he had imagined meeting his bride. He had pictured her stepping down from the coach, perhaps shy but healthy, and them making awkward but pleasant conversation on the ride to the ranch. Instead, she lay unconscious, her fate uncertain. The ride to the ranch seemed to take hours, though it was barely 40 minutes. Augustus kept glancing back at Willa, watching the rise and fall of her chest, praying that she would simply be suffering from exhaustion and dehydration rather than something more serious. The landscape around them was beautiful in the late summer, with golden grasses stretching toward distant mountains, but Augustus barely noticed. When they finally reached the ranch house, a sturdy 2-story structure built from local timber and stone, Augustus's foreman, Miguel Reyes, came running from the barn. "Boss, what happened?" Miguel asked, his dark eyes widening as he saw the unconscious woman. "My bride took sick on the journey," Augustus said, carefully lifting Willa from the wagon. She stirred slightly at the movement, a small moan escaping her lips. "I need you to ride back to town. Mrs. Henderson is preparing some medicine. Bring it back as quickly as you can. And see if Doc Brennan has returned." Miguel nodded and was on his horse within moments, galloping back toward Delta. Augustus carried Willa into the house, past the sparse but clean front room, and up the stairs to the bedroom he had prepared for her. It was the largest bedroom aside from his own, with windows facing east to catch the morning light. He had purchased a new quilt from a traveling merchant, and had even picked wildflowers that now sat wilting in a mason jar on the dresser. Augustus laid Willa gently on the bed and stood for a moment, uncertain. He had never tended to a sick woman before, and propriety dictated that he should not be alone with her like this. But propriety would have to wait. Her breathing was becoming more labored, and when he touched her forehead again, she was indeed burning with fever. He went downstairs and pumped water into a basin, grabbed several clean cloths from the kitchen, and returned to the bedroom. Carefully, respectfully, he began to remove her traveling jacket and boots, trying to make her more comfortable. Her dress was damp with perspiration, and he hesitated before deciding to leave it in place but loosen the buttons at her collar. Augustus dipped a cloth in the cool water and began to bathe her face and neck, wiping away the dust and sweat from her journey. As he worked, he studied her face properly for the first time. She was pretty, though not in the conventional way that made men turn their heads in the street. Her features were gentle, her mouth soft even in unconsciousness. There was a small scar above her left eyebrow that she had never mentioned in her letters. "You are safe now," he murmured, though he doubted she could hear him. "I will take care of you until you are well." Hours passed. Augustus continued to bathe her skin with cool water, trying to bring down the fever. The sun began to set, painting the room in shades of orange and gold. Willa sometimes stirred, mumbling words he could not quite catch, her head moving restlessly on the pillow. Once her eyes opened briefly, unfocused and glassy with fever. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You are at my ranch," Augustus said gently, leaning closer. "You are safe. You took ill during your journey." "Augustus?" she asked, his name sounding strange and familiar all at once on her lips. "Yes, I am Augustus. You need to rest now." But her eyes had already closed again, consciousness slipping away like water through fingers. Augustus felt a strange ache in his chest. He had expected to feel nervous about meeting his mail-order bride, perhaps even regretful if they did not suit each other. Instead, he felt protective, almost fierce in his determination to see her recover. Miguel returned as darkness fell completely, bringing not only the medicine from Mrs. Henderson, but also Doc Brennan himself. The doctor was a stout man in his 50s with intelligent eyes and steady hands. "Let me examine her," Doc Brennan said, shooing Augustus from the room. Augustus paced the hallway outside, listening to the sounds of the examination. When the doctor emerged 15 minutes later, his expression was serious but not grave. "She has a severe fever, likely from drinking bad water somewhere along her journey," the doctor explained. "I have seen this before with travelers. Her body is exhausted from the long trip, which makes fighting the sickness harder. The next few days will be critical. She needs to stay cool, and you must try to get fluids into her whenever she is conscious enough to drink. Mrs. Henderson's willow bark tea will help with the fever and pain. If she makes it through the next 3 days without the fever worsening, she should recover fully." "And if the fever worsens?" Augustus asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. "Then we will deal with that when the time comes," Doc Brennan said, placing a hand on Augustus's shoulder. "But she is young and seems strong despite her current state. I have faith she will pull through. I will check on her tomorrow." After the doctor left, Augustus prepared the willow bark tea according to Mrs. Henderson's instructions. He returned to Willa's bedside and carefully lifted her head, trying to get her to drink. She swallowed a few sips before turning her face away, and he had to be content with that small victory. That night, Augustus brought a chair into the bedroom and sat beside Willa's bed, watching over her as the hours crept by. He dozed fitfully, waking at every sound she made. Sometime near dawn, he woke to find her eyes open and looking at him with surprising clarity. "You stayed," she said, her voice hoarse but coherent. "Of course," Augustus replied, moving to the edge of his chair. "How do you feel?" "Like I have been trampled by a horse," Willa said, attempting a smile that came out as more of a grimace. "I am sorry. This is not how I imagined we would meet. Do not apologize. You could not help becoming ill." Augustus poured her some water from the pitcher on the nightstand. "Can you drink this?" Willa nodded, and he helped her sit up slightly, supporting her back with his arm. She was still weak, trembling with the effort, but she managed to drink nearly half the glass before sinking back against the pillows. "I ruined everything," she whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. "You must think I am so foolish." "I think you are sick and need to rest," Augustus said firmly. "Nothing is ruined. You are here and you will get better. That is all that matters." "You are kinder than I expected," Willa said, her eyes beginning to close again. "Your letters were kind, but letters can lie." "I do not lie," Augustus said softly. "Now sleep. We will talk more when you are stronger." Over the next 3 days, Augustus barely left Willa's side except to tend to the most urgent ranch business. Miguel and the other ranch hands took over most of his responsibilities without complaint. Augustus brought Willa tea and broth, helped her drink water, and continued to bathe her face and arms with cool cloths when the fever spiked. During her more lucid moments, they talked in brief exchanges. He learned that she had come from Philadelphia, that her parents had both died of cholera 2 years prior, and that her older brother's wife had made it clear that Willa was no longer welcome in their home. Becoming a mail-order bride had seemed like her best option for a fresh start. "I was so nervous about meeting you," Willa confessed on the 3rd evening, her fever finally beginning to break. "I worried that we would not suit, that I would be a disappointment." "You could never be a disappointment," Augustus said, and he meant it. Over these days of caring for her, he had developed a tenderness toward this woman that surprised him. He admired her courage in traveling so far alone, her determination to push through even when sick, and the gentle gratitude she showed even in her weakest moments. "You do not know me well enough to say that," Willa said, but she smiled. It was the first real smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her face entirely, making her eyes shine despite her pallor. "Then I look forward to knowing you better," Augustus replied. By the 4th day, Willa's fever had broken completely. She was still weak, barely able to stand without assistance, but the danger had passed. Doc Brennan confirmed it during his daily visit. "She will need another week or 2 of rest and good food to regain her strength," the doctor said. "But she is out of the woods. You did well, Augustus." As Willa's health improved, Augustus found himself reluctant to return to his normal routine. He had grown accustomed to spending his days in her room, talking with her as she slowly recovered. They discussed everything from books they had read to their childhoods, from his experiences building the ranch to her dreams of what her new life might hold. "Tell me about the ranch," Willa said one afternoon, now able to sit propped up against pillows. She was wearing a clean nightgown that Martha Henderson had brought by, and some color had returned to her cheeks. Augustus described his 160 acres, the cattle he raised, the horses he trained. He told her about Miguel, who had worked for him for 5 years and had become more friend than employee. He explained how he had come west at 21 with almost nothing and had built everything through hard work and careful planning. "It sounds wonderful," Willa said wistfully. "I hope I can see it all properly soon." "You will," Augustus promised. When you are stronger, I will show you everything." A week after her arrival, Willa was finally well enough to come downstairs. Augustus helped her navigate the steps, his arm around her waist to steady her. She was still thin from the illness, her frame delicate beneath his touch, but she was getting stronger each day. The main room of the house was simple but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace, sturdy furniture that Augustus had built himself, and windows that looked out over the land. Willa moved to the window and stood there for a long moment, taking in the view of rolling grassland, the distant mountains, and the horses in the corral. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "So different from Philadelphia. Do you miss the city?" Augustus asked, suddenly worried that she might find ranch life too isolated. "Not as much as I thought I would," Willa admitted. "There is something peaceful about this place. In Philadelphia, I always felt like I was in the way, an extra mouth to feed. Here, I feel like I could belong." "You do belong," Augustus said, the words coming out more intensely than he intended. "This is your home now." Willa turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. They had not yet discussed the nature of their arrangement, the fact that she had come here to be his wife. The illness had postponed all such conversations, leaving them in a strange limbo where they were something more than strangers but not yet what they had agreed to become. "Augustus," Willa began, then hesitated. "I know that I came here with certain expectations, certain agreements. But I have been such a burden already. I would understand if you wanted to reconsider our arrangement." "Reconsider?" Augustus felt his heart sink. "Is that what you want?" "No," Willa said quickly. "No, but I worry that you might feel trapped. You have been so kind, taking care of me when you had no real obligation to do so. We are not married yet. You could send me back without anyone blaming you." Augustus crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just in front of her. "I do not want to send you back. These past days, getting to know you, caring for you, it has not felt like a burden. It has felt like the most natural thing in the world." "Truly?" Willa asked, her eyes searching his face. "Truly," Augustus confirmed. "But I will not hold you to our agreement if your feelings have changed. You have been through a terrible ordeal. If you need more time, if you want to wait before we marry, I will understand." "I do not want to wait," Willa said softly. "I came here hoping to build a new life, to find a place where I belong. Being here with you, even being sick, I have felt more at home than I have in years. If you still want me, I would be honored to become your wife." Augustus felt something warm and bright unfurl in his chest. He took Willa's hands in his own, careful of her still fragile strength. "I do want you. I want to marry you and build a life together here." They were married 3 weeks later in Delta's small church, with half the town in attendance. Willa had regained most of her strength by then, and Martha Henderson had helped her make a simple but pretty dress from fabric that Augustus had purchased from the general store. The ceremony was brief, conducted by a circuit preacher who passed through Delta once a month, but it felt sacred and true. When Augustus kissed Willa at the end of the ceremony, it was chaste and gentle, but it sent a thrill through him that he had never experienced before. This was his wife, this brave woman who had traveled across the country to start a new life, who had fought through illness and weakness and had chosen to stay. The reception was held at the ranch, with Miguel and the ranch hands helping to prepare tables of food in the yard. The townsfolk brought dishes to share, and there was music from a fiddle player and even some dancing as the sun set. Augustus danced with Willa, holding her carefully, still protective of her health even though she insisted she was fully recovered. "Are you happy?" he asked as they swayed to the music. "More than I ever thought possible," Willa replied, her hand warm in his. "When I left Philadelphia, I was so frightened. I thought I was running away from a bad situation, but I was really running toward something wonderful, toward you." That night, after the guests had departed and the ranch was quiet, Augustus carried Willa across the threshold of their home. He had moved his belongings into the master bedroom, the room he had not used since finishing the house, preferring to give her the best space while she recovered. Now it would be their room, their shared space. They were both nervous, two people who had known each other only a month, bound together by promises and hope. But when Augustus took Willa in his arms, when he kissed her with all the tenderness and passion he had been holding back, it felt right. It felt like coming home. The first months of their marriage were a time of adjustment and discovery. Willa threw herself into making the ranch house truly theirs, adding curtains she sewed herself, and starting a vegetable garden near the kitchen. She learned to cook the heartier meals that Augustus and the ranch hands needed, though her first attempts at biscuits were so hard they could have been used as ammunition. "I am sorry," she said, looking at the inedible lumps with dismay. "I was never much of a cook in Philadelphia." Augustus picked up one of the biscuits and examined it with exaggerated seriousness. "Well, if we ever have trouble with raiders, we can always throw these at them." Willa laughed, swatting his arm playfully. "You are terrible." "I am honest," Augustus said, pulling her close. "But I do not care if you can cook. We will learn together." And they did learn together, not just cooking but all the rhythms of married life. Augustus taught Willa to ride, starting her on his gentlest mare. She was nervous at first, having rarely been on horseback before, but she was determined to master it. He loved watching her gain confidence, the way her face lit up when she finally managed to trot without fear. Willa, in turn, introduced small comforts and refinements to their life. She subscribed to newspapers from back east and would read interesting articles to Augustus in the evenings. She organized his chaotic office, creating a system for managing the ranch accounts that made everything more efficient. She befriended the ranch hands' wives and helped establish a small school in Delta for the children of the area. As autumn turned to winter, their bond deepened. They would sit by the fire on cold evenings, Willa reading while Augustus carved or worked on tack repairs. Sometimes they would talk for hours about everything and nothing. Other times, they were content in comfortable silence, simply being together. One evening in late November, as the first snow began to fall, Willa set down her book and looked at Augustus with unusual seriousness. "I have been thinking," she said, "about how different my life could have been if I had not become sick on the journey." Augustus looked up from the bridle he was mending. "How do you mean?" "If I had arrived healthy, we would have met at the stagecoach, polite and formal with each other. You would have brought me here, and we probably would have married quickly out of obligation. We might have spent months or even years being strangers living in the same house, too polite to really know each other. And instead—" Augustus prompted, though he thought he understood where she was going. "Instead, you saw me at my absolute worst. Weak, sick, unable to maintain any pretense or formality. You cared for me with such tenderness, and I saw the kind of man you truly are. We built our relationship on that foundation, on genuine care and concern rather than just obligation. The illness was terrible, but in a way, it was also a gift." Augustus set aside his work and moved to sit beside Willa on the settee. He took her hand, marveling as he often did at how small and fine-boned it was compared to his own work-roughened hands. "I fell in love with you during those days you were sick," he said quietly. It was the first time either of them had spoken the word love aloud, though it had been implied in countless small gestures and tender moments. "I did not know it at the time, but looking back, that is when it happened. When you were so brave and tried to apologize for being ill, when you worried more about being a burden than about your own suffering. That is when I knew you were extraordinary. I fell in love with you then too," Willa admitted, her eyes bright with emotion. Even through the fever, I remember how gentle you were, how you never made me feel ashamed or embarrassed. You stayed with me when you did not have to. That meant everything. Augustus kissed her then, a deep kiss full of all the love he felt. When they finally parted, Willa was smiling. I am glad I came to Colorado, she said. I am glad I became sick, and I am glad you were the one waiting for me. So am I, Augustus said. So am I. Winter settled over the ranch, bringing snow and cold, but also a kind of cozy intimacy. Augustus and Willa grew closer with each passing day, their love deepening from the initial spark into something solid and enduring. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the way Willa was grumpy in the mornings until she had her coffee, the way Augustus would pace when he was worried about something. They also learned each other's pasts more fully. Willa spoke of her childhood in Philadelphia, the happy years before her parents died and the difficult ones after. She described her brother, who had been loving once but had changed after marrying a woman who resented any competition for his attention and resources. Augustus shared stories of his own past, the hard years after his parents died when he was 19. He told her about his sister Clara, who had married a merchant in Denver and wrote to him regularly. He described his decision to come west, driven by a desire to build something of his own rather than work on someone else's land. I was lonely before you came, Augustus admitted one snowy evening. I did not realize how lonely until you were here. The ranch was successful, I had good workers and enough money, but it all felt hollow without someone to share it with. You are never allowed to be lonely again, Willa said firmly. I will not permit it. Is that an order, Mrs. Noble? Augustus asked with a smile. It absolutely is, Mr. Noble, Willa replied, kissing him soundly. Spring came early in 1877. Melting the snow and bringing new life to the ranch. The cattle that had wintered over were healthy, and several of the horses had foals. Willa delighted in the baby animals, spending hours watching them gambol in the fields. In April, Willa began to feel ill again, and Augustus's heart nearly stopped with fear. But this time, the sickness was different. It came in the mornings and passed quickly. Martha Henderson, visiting for tea one afternoon, took one look at Willa's face and smiled knowingly. How long have you been feeling this way? Martha asked. A few weeks, Willa admitted. I thought perhaps I was eating something that did not agree with me. My dear girl, I think you are with child, Martha said gently. Willa's eyes widened, her hand going instinctively to her still flat stomach. Are you certain? As certain as I can be without a doctor's confirmation, but I have had 4 children of my own. I recognize the signs. When Augustus came in from working with the horses that evening, Willa was waiting for him, her face glowing with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. I have news, she said before he could even remove his hat. Martha thinks I am expecting a baby. Augustus stood frozen for a moment, processing the information. Then a wide smile spread across his face, and he swept Willa into his arms, spinning her around before remembering her condition and setting her down carefully. A baby, he said wonderingly. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy? Willa asked, though his expression made the answer obvious. Happy does not begin to cover it, Augustus said, his hands cradling her face. You have given me everything I never knew I wanted. Doc Brennan confirmed the pregnancy a week later, estimating that the baby would arrive in late October or early November. Augustus immediately became overprotective, trying to prevent Willa from doing any heavy work. She found this both endearing and exasperating. I am pregnant, not made of glass, she protested when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. Women have been having babies and doing work for thousands of years. "But you were so sick before," Augustus argued. "I cannot bear the thought of anything happening to you." Willa softened, understanding his fear. She took his hands and placed them on her stomach. "I am strong now. You helped make me strong, but I promise to be careful and to tell you if I ever feel unwell." As summer progressed, Willa's belly began to swell with their growing child. Augustus found himself constantly in awe, watching the visible proof of their love. They spent long evenings discussing names and futures, imagining what their child might be like. "If it is a boy, I hope he has your kindness," Willa said one evening. "If it is a girl, I hope she has your courage," Augustus replied. The baby arrived on a cold November evening, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Augustus had ridden into town for supplies when Willa's pain started. Miguel's wife, Rosa, who had moved into one of the ranch's smaller houses with her husband over the summer, helped Willa through the early stages of labor, while Miguel himself rode like the wind to fetch Augustus and Doc Brennan. By the time Augustus burst through the door, wild with worry, the baby was nearly ready to be born. Doc Brennan barred him from the bedroom, saying his presence would only make things more difficult, but Augustus could hear Willa's cries and it tore at his heart. "Please," he prayed to whatever powers might be listening. "Please let them both be safe. I cannot lose her." Finally, after what seemed like an eternity but was actually only a few hours, he heard a different sound, the thin, angry wail of a newborn. Augustus's legs nearly gave out with relief. Doc Brennan emerged a few minutes later, smiling broadly. "You have a healthy son," he announced, "and your wife did beautifully. She is tired but well. You can go in now." Augustus entered the bedroom to find Willa propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up as he approached, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Meet your son," she said softly. Augustus sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was still red-faced from crying, but to Augustus, he was perfect. "He is beautiful," Augustus whispered, afraid to speak louder and disturb this perfect moment. "You are amazing. I cannot believe you did this." "We did this," Willa corrected gently. "He is ours, Augustus, our family." They named him James after Augustus's father. Little James was a healthy baby with strong lungs and an appetite that kept Willa busy. Augustus was devoted to his son, waking in the night to bring him to Willa for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, and walking the floor with James when he was fussy. "You are going to spoil him," Willa said one afternoon, watching Augustus make faces to get their 3-month-old son to smile. "That is my right as his father," Augustus replied, finally earning a gummy grin from James that made his heart melt. Besides, how could anyone resist this face? As James grew, the ranch continued to prosper. Augustus expanded the cattle operation and developed a reputation for training excellent horses. Willa became known throughout the area for her kindness and intelligence, often helping settle disputes and offering advice to newer settlers. When James was 2 years old, Willa became pregnant again. This time she carried the baby with less difficulty, and in the summer of 1880 they welcomed a daughter they named Ruth, after Willa's mother. Ruth had Willa's fine features and Augustus's dark coloring, and she was doted on by both her parents and her big brother. The years passed in a rhythm of hard work and deep contentment. James and Ruth grew up running wild on the ranch, learning to ride almost as soon as they could walk. Augustus taught them about the land and the animals, while Willa ensured they could read and write and understand the wider world. In 1883, when James was 6 and Ruth was 3, Willa gave birth to twin boys, Thomas and Henry. The ranch house suddenly felt much smaller and much louder, filled with the chaos and joy of 4 young children. Augustus built an addition to the house, adding bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. "I never imagined I would have such a large family," Willa said one evening, surveying the disaster that was their living room after the children's play. "Back in Philadelphia, I thought I would end up a spinster, alone and unwanted." "You could never be unwanted," Augustus said, helping her pick up the scattered toys. "You are the center of everything. This whole life we have built revolves around you." "Around us," Willa corrected, just as she had when James was born. "We built this together." When Augustus turned 45 in 1889, the ranch had grown to over 300 acres. James, now 12, was already helping with the serious work of running the operation. Ruth, at 9, had declared her intention to become a doctor and spent her free time reading every medical book she could get her hands on. The twins, at 6, were inseparable and equally prone to mischief. Augustus and Willa would sometimes steal away in the evenings, riding out to a favorite spot on the edge of their property where they could watch the sunset over the mountains. It was there, on a warm summer evening, that they reflected on the journey that had brought them together. "Do you ever think about that day you arrived?" Augustus asked, his arm around Willa as they sat on a blanket watching the sky turn gold and pink. "Often," Willa admitted. "I remember how frightened I was, even through the fever. I was so worried that I had made a terrible mistake, that I would arrive and find you were not the man I hoped you would be." "And what did you find instead?" "I found someone better than I hoped," Willa said, turning to look at him. "I found a man who cared for me when I was at my weakest, who saw past the illness to the person beneath. I found a partner, a lover, a friend. I found home." Augustus kissed her, a kiss that still carried all the passion and tenderness of their early days together, despite the years and the children and the comfortable familiarity they now shared. "I used to think I was content with my life before you came," Augustus said. "I had my ranch and my work, and I thought that was enough. But it was like living in a house with all the curtains closed. You opened the curtains and let the light in. You showed me what life could truly be." "We saved each other," Willa said simply. "You gave me a home and a family when I had neither. I gave you someone to share your life with. We were both incomplete, and we made each other whole." As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering darkness, they could see the lights of their home glowing warmly in the windows. They could hear, faintly, the sounds of their children playing before bedtime. Miguel and Rosa's house also showed lights, as did the small cottage where 2 of their newer ranch hands lived with their families. The ranch had become more than just a business or a home. It had become a community, a place where people looked out for each other and worked together. And at the center of it all was the love that Augustus and Willa shared, the foundation upon which everything else was built. In 1892, when Willa turned 38, their youngest child, a daughter named Clara after Augustus's sister, was born. The older children were enchanted with their baby sister, and even the twins, now 9 and usually too busy for anything that did not involve horses or mischief, could be found making faces to get her to smile. 5 children, Augustus marveled, holding baby Clara while Willa rested. "We have quite the family. Are you complaining?" Willa asked with a tired but happy smile. "Never," Augustus said firmly. "Every single one of them is a blessing. Every single day with you is a blessing." As the years continued to pass, the older children began to find their own paths. James took over more of the ranch operations, working alongside his father and eventually bringing home a wife of his own, a spirited young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch. Ruth did indeed pursue medicine, leaving for medical school back east with her parents' blessing and pride. The twins went into business together, starting a horse trading operation that took them across several states, but always brought them home to the ranch eventually. Young Clara, as she grew, showed a talent for art, filling the house with sketches and paintings of ranch life. Augustus and Willa grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining lines, but their love never diminishing. They became grandparents multiple times over, their house once again filled with the sounds of children, though this time it was their grandchildren running through the halls. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1901, their children threw them a celebration that brought together nearly everyone in Delta and the surrounding ranches. Augustus and Willa stood together, surrounded by the life they had built, and marveled at how far they had come from that dusty day in August 1876, when a sick woman had stumbled off a stagecoach into the arms of a stranger. "You remember how worried you were that I would send you back?" Augustus asked Willa as they danced, still moving together as naturally as breathing. "I remember thinking I could not bear it if you did," Willa replied. "I was already half in love with you from your letters. Meeting you, even sick as I was, I knew I had found something precious." "We both found something precious," Augustus said. "We found each other." As the celebration continued around them, with music and laughter and the warmth of family and friends, Augustus thought back to the man he had been before Willa arrived. That man had been successful and capable, but ultimately alone. He had not known what he was missing until he held a feverish woman in his arms and realized that caring for her felt more right than anything else in his life. The years continued their steady march. Augustus and Willa remained active well into their 60s, though they gradually turned over more of the ranch operations to James and his family. They spent their time with their grandchildren, worked in Willa's expansive garden, and took long rides across the land they loved. Delta had grown from a small frontier town into a thriving community, and the Nobles were considered founding families, respected and loved by all who knew them. The ranch had become one of the most successful in the region, known for quality cattle and expertly trained horses. But more than any of their material success, Augustus and Willa treasured the family they had created. Their children were all happy and settled, their grandchildren were growing up strong and loved, and the legacy they would leave was one of hard work, integrity, and devotion. In the summer of 1910, when Augustus was 66 and Willa was 56, they took a trip back east so Willa could visit Ruth, who was now a respected doctor in Boston. It was Willa's first time back to that part of the country since leaving in 1876, and she was struck by how much it had changed and how much she had changed with it. "I barely recognize it," she told Augustus, as they walked through streets that should have been familiar. "Or perhaps I barely recognize the woman I was when I lived here." "That woman was brave enough to travel across the country to marry a stranger," Augustus reminded her. "That woman had all the strength and courage that you have now. She just had not had the chance to use it yet." They visited Ruth and her husband, met their grandchildren who lived in the city, and marveled at the modern conveniences and the pace of urban life. But both Augustus and Willa were relieved when it was time to board the train back to Colorado. "The East has its charms," Willa said as they settled into their seats, "but it is not home. Home is the ranch, the mountains, the wide open spaces. Home is where we built our life together." When they returned to Delta, they were greeted like conquering heroes by their family. A welcome home dinner was held at the ranch, with all their children and grandchildren in attendance. As Augustus looked around the crowded table, seeing the faces of those he loved most in the world, He felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. That night, lying in bed beside Willa, he took her hand in the darkness. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" Willa asked, though her tone suggested she knew. "For getting on that stagecoach, for being brave enough to come west, for choosing to stay even when you could have left, for building this life with me, for everything." "Thank you for being there when the stagecoach arrived," Willa replied, "for caring for me when I was sick, for being patient and kind and loving, for giving me a home and a family and a purpose, for everything." They fell asleep holding hands as they had countless nights before, two people who had found each other against the odds and had built something beautiful together. The years that followed were gentle ones. Augustus and Willa remained active and engaged with their family and community, but they also took time to simply enjoy each other's company. They had earned their rest, and they took it with gratitude. In 1920, when they had been married for 44 years, Delta held a celebration in their honor. The whole town turned out to pay tribute to the couple who had become such an integral part of the community's fabric. There were speeches and music and enough food to feed an army. Augustus, now 76 but still strong, stood before the crowd with Willa at his side. "When I was a young man alone on this ranch," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, "I thought I had everything I needed. I had land and cattle and honest work, but I was wrong. I did not have everything until a brave woman traveled from Philadelphia to become my wife. She arrived sick and weak, but she was the strongest person I had ever met. She took this house and made it a home. She took my solitary life and filled it with love and laughter and family. Everything good in my life flows from the day she arrived. So this celebration is not for me. It is for her, for Willa, the woman who changed everything." There was not a dry eye in the crowd, and Willa herself was crying openly as Augustus kissed her to thunderous applause. Later, when it was Willa's turn to speak, she kept it simple. "I came to Colorado expecting nothing more than a roof over my head and honest work. Instead, I found love beyond my wildest dreams. I found a partner who treated me as an equal, who valued my thoughts and opinions, who supported my dreams and aspirations. I found a man who showed me what true love looks like through his actions every single day. Augustus Noble is the best man I have ever known, and being his wife has been the greatest honor of my life. Whatever good we have done in this community, whatever success we have achieved, it is all because we did it together. We were stronger together than either of us could ever have been alone." The celebration continued late into the night, with their grandchildren and great-grandchildren playing together while the adults talked and laughed and danced. Augustus and Willa watched it all with deep satisfaction, knowing that their legacy would continue through the generations. As the 1920s progressed, Augustus and Willa slowed down considerably, their bodies finally showing the wear of decades of hard work and long life. But their minds remained sharp, and their love for each other never wavered. They spent their days in quiet companionship, reading together, tending a small garden, and enjoying visits from their ever-expanding family. James and Sarah had taken over the ranch completely, running it with the same dedication and integrity that Augustus had shown. The operation continued to prosper, adapting to changing times and new methods while maintaining its core values. In the spring of 1925, Augustus fell ill with pneumonia. He was 81 years old, and though he fought the sickness with the same determination he had shown in building the ranch, his body was simply worn out. Doc Brennan, long since retired but still consulted for the Noble family, was honest about the prognosis. "His time is coming," the old doctor said gently to Willa. "I am sorry. Willa, now 71 herself, nodded with the calm acceptance of someone who had long understood that this day would eventually arrive. She sat beside Augustus's bed, holding his hand just as he had once held hers when she was the sick one. "You cannot leave me yet," she told him during one of his lucid moments. "We have made it this far together. We need a few more years at least." Augustus smiled weakly. "I will stay as long as I can," he promised. "But Willa, if I go first, you must promise me something." "Anything," Willa said, tears streaming down her face. "Promise me you will not grieve too long. Promise me you will continue to live, to enjoy your family, to find joy in each day. You gave me the most beautiful life imaginable. I want you to continue having a beautiful life, even if I am not there to share it." "I promise to try," Willa said, though she could not imagine life without him. "But Augustus, you must know that you are my life. From the moment you cared for me when I was sick, you have been the center of my world." "And you have been mine," Augustus replied. "That day you arrived, so sick and fragile, I thought I was just fulfilling my obligation to help you. I had no idea I was welcoming my whole future into my life. You were my future, Willa. You and our children and all the joy we have shared. I have no regrets, not a single one." "Neither do I," Willa whispered. "Even all those years ago when I was so sick and scared, even then I had no regrets about coming here, because it brought me to you." Augustus lived for another week, long enough to see each of his children and many of his grandchildren. They came to say goodbye, to thank him for his love and guidance, to tell him how much he meant to them. Through it all, Willa remained at his side, leaving only when absolutely necessary. On a quiet morning in May, with the sun streaming through the bedroom windows and Willa holding his hand, Augustus Noble passed away peacefully. His last words were simple but encompassing. "I love you. Thank you for everything." The funeral was the largest Delta had ever seen. People came from across the state to pay their respects to a man who had been a pillar of the community for nearly 50 years. But for Willa, the loss was deeply personal and almost unbearable. She had lost her partner, her best friend, her great love. In the months that followed, Willa kept her promise to Augustus. She continued to live, to engage with her family, to find small joys in each day. But there was a sadness in her eyes that never quite went away, a piece of her heart that had been buried with her husband. She spent her time writing down their story, wanting to ensure that future generations would know how Augustus and Willa Noble had met, how an illness had brought them together in the most unexpected way, and how their love had built something lasting and beautiful. She wrote of the fear and uncertainty of those early days, the tenderness Augustus had shown, the love that had grown between them. "Many people think love should be easy," she wrote. "They believe that if it is difficult at the start, it is not meant to be. But our love was born in difficulty, in sickness and fear and uncertainty. Augustus cared for me when he had every reason to send me away. He showed me kindness when I was at my weakest. And from that foundation of genuine care and compassion, we built a love that lasted a lifetime. Our love was not easy at first, but it was real. And that made all the difference." Willa lived for 5 more years after Augustus's death, years filled with the love of her children and grandchildren, but marked always by the absence of her husband. She remained sharp and engaged, continuing to be a source of wisdom and guidance for her family. In the autumn of 1930, Willa began to feel tired in a way that went beyond normal fatigue. She knew, in the way that people sometimes do, that her time was limited. She gathered her children together and spoke to them about what she wanted when she was gone. "I want to be buried beside your father," she said simply. "We were together for 49 years in life. I want to be together with him in death as well." "We will make sure of it, Mama," James promised, his voice thick with emotion. Willa smiled at her oldest son, seeing so much of Augustus in his face. "You have been such a good son, James. All of you have been wonderful children. Your father and I were so blessed." In November of 1930, Willa Noble passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76. She was laid to rest beside Augustus in the cemetery overlooking Delta, with the mountains they both loved visible in the distance. The marker that was placed above their shared grave was simple but meaningful. Augustus and Willa Noble, together in life, together in eternity. Their love built a legacy that endures. The ranch continued under James's management and eventually passed to his children and then to their children. The story of Augustus and Willa became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The account Willa had written of their lives was preserved carefully, a treasured family heirloom that offered insight into the love and dedication that had founded their family. Decades after their deaths, the Noble Ranch remained one of the most successful in the region. The house had been expanded and modernized over the years, but the core structure that Augustus had built and Willa had made into a home still stood. The family made sure that the story of their ancestors' meeting was never forgotten. Every year on what would have been Augustus and Willa's wedding anniversary, the family would gather at the cemetery. They would bring flowers and tell stories, ensuring that new generations understood the foundation upon which their family had been built. They spoke of Augustus's kindness in caring for a sick stranger, of Willa's courage in traveling across the country alone, of the love that had grown from such an unpromising beginning. The story of Augustus and Willa Noble became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of compassion, the importance of kindness, and the way that love can bloom in the most unexpected circumstances. It was a story of two people who had both been alone and incomplete, who had found each other through chance and correspondence, and who had built a life together that was richer and fuller than either could have imagined. Their legacy was not just in the ranch they had built or the children they had raised. It was in the example they had set of what true partnership looked like, of how two people could support and strengthen each other through all of life's challenges. They had shown that real love was not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It was about showing up every day, about caring for each other in sickness and in health, about building something together brick by brick, day by day. The Wild West had been a hard place, full of challenges and dangers, but it had also been a place of opportunity, where people could reinvent themselves and build new lives. Augustus and Willa had both come to Colorado seeking something better, though they had not known exactly what that would be. What they had found was each other, and in finding each other, they had found everything. Their story had started with illness, with Willa arriving sick and weak at the Delta stagecoach stop. But that difficult beginning had set the tone for everything that followed. Augustus had not seen a burden when he looked at the sick woman. He had seen someone who needed help, and he had provided it without hesitation or complaint. That act of simple human kindness had been the seed from which their entire life together had grown. And Willa, weak and frightened as she had been, had recognized the goodness in Augustus from the very beginning. She had trusted him when she was at her most vulnerable, and that trust had been rewarded 1,000 times over in the years that followed. In the end, their story was a simple one. A man and a woman had met under difficult circumstances, had cared for each other, had fallen in love, and had built a life together. They had raised children, built a successful ranch, and contributed to their community. They had loved each other deeply for nearly 50 years, and even death had not truly separated them, for they lived on in the memories of their descendants and in the legacy they had created. The ranch that Augustus had started as a solitary man's dream had become a family empire, home to multiple generations of nobles who all traced their lineage back to that dusty day in August 1876, when a sick woman had stepped off a stagecoach and into the arms of her future. Every member of the family carried part of Augustus and Willa's legacy within them, the legacy of kindness, hard work, devotion, and enduring love. And so the story of Augustus and Willa Noble, the cowboy and his mail-order bride, became the foundation story of the Noble family. It was told at family gatherings and written down in journals. It was the answer to the question every noble child eventually asked: where did our family come from? The answer was always the same: from love, from courage, from two people who found each other when they needed each other most and built something beautiful together. Their love story, which had begun in such an unlikely way with illness and uncertainty, had blossomed into something that transcended their individual lives. It became proof that even in the hardest times and places, love could flourish. It showed that sometimes the greatest loves are built not in perfect circumstances, but in the willingness to care for each other through imperfect ones. Augustus and Willa had both understood that love was not just a feeling but an action, a choice made every day to put the other person first, to build something together, to weather storms side by side. And that understanding had carried them through a lifetime of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge, always together, always united. Their story was complete, their love enduring, their legacy secure for generations to come.